youngster, my family would go camping with several other church families up at Lake Texoma. We'd spend a couple of weeks there. Dad would get up before sunrise and go fishing. Often he would get back before my brothers and I woke up. On Sundays, after fishing, Dad would make communion bread, and all of us that were camping together would get our lawn chairs together and circle them up and have worship service. We used the tailgate of the station wagon as a communion table. We'd get Dixie cups to pour the grape juice in and pass it out along with Dad's bread. Those were special times and fond memories. Becky's going to show you how she makes communion bread. The recipe is going to be below the video, so you can look for it there.
This is a recipe given to me by a very sweet lady in Ohio named Irita Bice. She used to make the communion bread for our entire congregation every single week. And this is her recipe. I am only doing 2/3 of the recipe, which should make about enough for a month for a family. So what we're going to do is we're start with 2 cups of flour. I am not real fussy about measuring. You can be if you want. And then 2/3 of a cup of Crisco. And we are just going to cut this into the flour using a pastry cutter. It's just like making biscuits if you've made homemade biscuits. Okay. Oh, there goes my recipe. Okay. So we are going to cut these in till it's fairly fine. Sometimes I find I need a knife to get it off the pan. My mother-in-law could do this in just a few seconds with 2 knives, and I've never figured out just how she did that. Now, of course, we're making this unleavened, so there'll be no yeast, no baking powder, none of that in it. It's just flour and Crisco and salt. Okay, when I've got about half in, I'm going to put, it's 2/3 of a teaspoon of salt. Like I said, you can measure it if you want to. I usually don't. I washed my hands really well before I started, which we should all be doing a whole lot of. Put this in the sink. We need half a cup of water. I'm just going to go ahead and use the cup I measured with. And yes, I know this isn't a liquid measure, but like I said, this is an easy recipe. Take a fork, and I'm just going to stir it around till it makes a dough. I usually just use my hands for the rest of it. Oops. Okay. You don't want to overmix it. It'll get tough. Okay, so now I'm going to rinse my hands. You don't have to let this dough set like you do with pie crust or anything like that. It might make it more flaky, I don't know. I just never have. And we're going to roll it out. I like to roll it out about 1/4 of an inch thick. And you'll probably leave some of it in the bowl. I just smoosh it on top. Some on the top. See how it's still flaky? Don't make it. mine out with a round. This one's about 2.5 inches round. If you're doing this with your kids, you could use something like a heart shape as symbolic of Jesus' love. You can do all kinds of creative things. I'm going to go ahead and stick with the round. This might also be a good thing if you're doing this with your kids to make another batch of bread with the yeast and let them see the difference. So here we go. And now I'm just going to put them on you don't have to grease your baking pan because of all the Crisco in it. You really don't have to pierce them. They just stay a little flatter if you do. I've made them where I've forgotten and they've come out fine. I have seen some really fancy designs on Pinterest if you want to go real special. Because of all the Crisco in it. I've got my oven preheated to 300 degrees. It's a real low cooking temperature. This is kind of like glorified pie crust, really. Okay, and I'm going to gather it up and roll it out again. I like things to be flaky and layery, so I'm not worried about that. You can be more careful if you wish. Talk about those in a minute. Okay. This is more than enough. My kids always want to eat the leftovers, so I'm just going to roll those out and cut them into strips. Now, you can also cut these into little bitty squares if you want the individual servings where nobody all has to touch the same communion bread. You can do that. If you're going to do that, one of these is really nice to just score it. We're going to bake these in the kind of middle of the oven for 15 to 20 minutes. 15 if you like them soft in the middle and kind of doughy. 20 if you like them a little more crispy on the outside. So we're going to go ahead and put these in. Set my timer. We like ours a little more crispy, so I'm going to do 20 minutes. Okay. Okay, Jay wanted me to say something about getting juice for communion. And the easiest thing that we have found is Welch's comes in these little bottles. You can get them in a 6-pack. You can use 1 bottle a week, and that'll last you for 6 weeks. Frozen grape juice also works. Then you have the problem of it spoiling, so you have to get 1 for each week. So we like these little bottles. We're going to take them out. A couple slide off. Your cookie sheet probably has edges. Okay, and there you have it. Now these can be frozen once they're cooled, but we have found that if you freeze them, they're okay once you thaw them out. But what really just brings them back is if you toast them for about 10 minutes in the oven at 300. So I would recommend doing that. It should make you enough for more than a month.
Some people think that salt itself is a leavening agent. We don't have any recipes in the Bible about communion bread or Passover bread, but we do have something in Leviticus 2 about grain offering. There it says that you can use fine flour and oil for the grain offering, and you can cook it in a pan or a griddle or cook it in the oven. So those are the options. Also it says it can be as a cake or a wafer. One thing it does say is not to use yeast in it or honey. You might think, honey, why honey? That's because there's natural types of yeast that kind of float around the air, and if you have honey, yeast likes to feed on sugar, so it can create its own yeast bubbles and start to rise. Anyway, in Leviticus 2, it also says something about salt. Verse 13, God says, "Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings. Add salt to all your offerings." So part of the recipe does include salt.